last month I had an opportunity to attend a conference in Stockholm where I found the Swedes using a term that I hadn't heard before, knowledge resistance. And some of us who are interested in science communication have been using the term denialism to refer to people who reject accurate information that would correct their misunderstanding. But I'm really growing to like the idea of knowledge resistance. I think it applies to a much wider range of topics than certainly just science. So I changed my title, but I don't think you care a whole lot. That's and there are a lot of things that people get wrong. You all know that great Woody Allen joke, I've just finished the Evelyn Woods Reading Dynamics course. In 3 hours, I read War and Peace. It's about Russia. And we only use 10% of our brains, the Mozart effect, and so forth. There's a lot of things that people get wrong. But it's interesting that there are many things that we get wrong that people are willing to change their minds about if you explain why these notions are incorrect. And then there's a whole lot of other topics that people are wrong about which seem not to be very susceptible to changing with new information. The 9/11 truthers, the creationists, the climate change deniers, etc. Providing more accurate information doesn't seem to change opinions or rejection of erroneous views. So there seem to be some erroneous ideas that people change their minds about, and others that they are very knowledge resistant. Why can we change our minds about some things but have a tough time changing our minds about others? It's an interesting question, but it's also a very important question for Americans and probably for other people around the world as well. Many crucial decisions that our society needs to make require accurate information, and there are consequences when we make mistakes. Iraq having weapons of mass destruction being only one example. Or the idea that tax cuts for the wealthy increase jobs. There's a growing body of research on the subject of knowledge resistance, and it's possible to make some tentative conclusions to explain this phenomenon, though it's clear that obviously nobody's got all the answers at this point. And certainly for people like us who are interested in science, we would very much like to know better ways to get people to accept the scientific consensus on subjects like evolution, climate change, vaccination, and so forth. So why do we have knowledge resistance? Well, maybe the 9/11 truthers and creationists and people who think Trump's inauguration crowd pictures were fakes are just dumb. They're unintelligent. That doesn't seem to be very likely. No one is out there giving intelligence tests to climate science deniers, but our experience dealing with people who hold such views certainly doesn't lead us to conclude that they are below average in intelligence as a group. Maybe they're ignorant. Recalling, of course, that stupidity and ignorant are two different things. One is curable, remember that. And that's a very interesting question, and if the answer was ignorance, then we would know how to go about coping with knowledge resistance. Maybe they're ignorant, and if we provide them with more information, they will see the light. As Steve Novella noted yesterday in his lunchtime talk, the knowledge deficit model, however, doesn't work very well, at least for the second class of things people are knowledge resistant about. But before you conclude that knowledge is irrelevant, please note that there's research on this, and the results are a bit mixed. Excuse me. Dan Kahan and colleagues surveyed a group of Americans about their attitudes toward climate change and also collected information on their general scientific and mathematical knowledge. Now, if the ignorance is the explanation for knowledge resistance, then we would expect people who know more science would tend to agree with scientists that climate change is something to be concerned about. But that's not what Kahan and his colleagues found. Kahan and his colleagues found that the more knowledgeable people tended to be less concerned with climate change. Yet there is other research that suggests that this is not the end of the story. Kahan used a very general measure of scientific literacy, the questions on the science and engineering indicators. This is the publication that comes out every 2 years from the National Research Council of the National Science Foundation. You're familiar with these questions. This is the survey of adult Americans that asks things like, how does the Earth go around the sun or the sun go around the Earth? And most Americans get that right. This is good. And then for those who get the answer right, it asks how long does it take? Does it take 1 day, 1 year, et cetera? So you've run into this study before, even if you didn't know what it's called. But this is a pretty low bar for science literacy. Most of the questions asked on the SEI are not terribly sophisticated, so it's not hard to be somebody of relative higher science literacy. Excuse me. Australian researchers instead asked their sample about not general science knowledge, but knowledge of climate science. Sophie Guy and colleagues had a rather small sample, but nonetheless, they found that people who knew more about climate science were more concerned about its effects. Now, there's more to this figure than I'm explaining, but please hang in there. I'll get to this individualism, high and low, a little bit later on. But in general, though, it seems that ignorance of science is not the main driver of of knowledge resistance. Well, maybe knowledge resistors just hate science. Well, this one we actually have considerable research on. How many of you think Americans are anti-science? Anybody have that opinion? Okay. Let's take a look at the data. The Pew Research Center data on adult Americans shows that a majority of Americans believe science has a mostly positive effect on society, and only 4% believe that science is mostly negative. If Americans were anti-science, they would not be likely to trust scientists to be reliable sources of information on important issues. Yet for questions like the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, the causes of climate change and GMO foods, the public is more likely to trust scientists to provide information compared to other providers of information. You'll notice elected officials are at the bottom, which shows that Americans aren't all uninformed. In this 2014 Harris poll on occupation and prestige, scientists are right up there with doctors, firemen, and the military as high prestige occupations. And maybe one of the best indicators that Americans have a very high regard for science is when people are asked, would you encourage your child to go into this profession? Scientists are right up there with doctors and engineers. So there doesn't appear to be a big anti-science movement in the American public. In fact, this is just a smattering. There are many, many polls over many years that show that Americans have quite positive reactions to science. They want their kids to study it. They think science is a good thing. So how many of you think Americans are anti-science? There are fewer. See, it goes to show information does help. Denying evolution or climate change or vaccination or other scientific topics is not the same thing as saying, I think science is bad. What people are saying is, I don't like this science, but science is good. I don't like that science, but science is good. This is at least what the data seem to show us. So what can explain knowledge resistance? Apparently, it's not stupidity, ignorance, or hatred of science. So what is it? There are a lot of concepts that are floating around in the literature which overlap a lot: cultural cognition, confirmation bias, etc. For our purposes, for my purposes today, they all refer in some way to viewing factual information through a filter, usually an ideological or values-laden or identification filter. The ideas we are reluctant to change are the ones that have negative consequences or otherwise challenge our ideologies, values, or social identification. Values and ideology are shared by we social primates and become part of the identification that we share with our tribes. Identification can also sometimes refer to one's livelihood. We can change our minds more easily about what percentage of our brains do we use than we can about the prospect of losing a job in the oil industry. let me put in a good word for ideology. To many people, ideology is a four-letter word. In the cartoon, it's contrasted with science. Science is good, therefore ideology must be bad. I prefer a different understanding of ideology. The word ideology is like the word operation. It depends on the context in which you're using that term. A lobotomy and an appendectomy are both operations. I have had one. And I assume you will grant me the benefit of the doubt as to which of these two it is. But in all seriousness, just like with operations, there are ideologies that are destructive and injurious, and those that are beneficial and fulfilling. Ideologies affect how we shape our lives and how we run our lives. They are our isms, and they reflect and to some degree determine what is important to us. And each of us is a mixture of ideologies. One can be a feminist, humanist, environmentalist. Feminism, humanism, and environmentalism, these isms, are ideologies reflecting values we consider important, or some of us consider important. Values are part of being a social primate. They govern our interactions. We human beings live in groups. We identify with other people. We form tribes. Skeptics are a tribe in some contexts, holding mutual values and interests. We embrace groups that share our ideologies. So when I talk about people being motivated by ideologies, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It is, in fact, a human thing. And context determines whether it is good or bad. The problem is when an ideological position prevents someone from considering empirical evidence that might conflict with values or ideologies. And overcoming that very human tendency is one of the hardest things we have to do. And most people, including skeptics, don't do it very well. None of us, we all need to practice harder. And much of knowledge resistance is grounded exactly here. So let's look at how ideologies, values, and identifications can affect knowledge resistance. Working with some ideas from the anthropologist Mary Douglas, Dan Kahan and colleagues at the Yale Cultural Cognition Laboratory suggested that people can be placed along two axes depending on their values. There's an individualist communitarian axis and a cross-cutting hierarchical egalitarian axis. Now, everybody has tendencies on both of these. I'm sure you can go online and fill out a questionnaire somewhere and find out where you fit on this grid, and it's good, clean fun. That's fine. These values are loosely associated with political party and, of course, other groupings as well. Republicans are more likely to be hierarchical and individualistic. Democrats are more likely to be egalitarian and communitarian. Libertarians are egalitarian individualists, and I didn't know their symbol was the porcupine either. In the literature, there's not much of a discussion about that northeast quadrant there. In my opinion, evangelical Christians are hierarchist communitarians. But of course, this is not really parallel to the other three cells, which are political parties, so take that with a grain of salt there. But these axes are associated with differing opinions about social issues. What do people holding these differing views worry about? Well, hierarchical individualists don't worry much about climate change, nanotechnology, or guns, but they are very concerned about gun control. Diagonally to them, egalitarian communitarians worry a lot about climate change, nanotechnology, and guns, but are rather positive about gun control. And differences occur between the other two diagonals as well. Now, these concerns reflect values and ideologies as well as identities with groups. An individualist egalitarian, if you're down in the lower left, who feels strongly about involuntary mental health treatment is going to be resistant to information that promotes that practice. Such information may threaten libertarian values and/or potentially cause a rift with other libertarians, the tribe. So such information is likely to be rejected. Kahan and colleagues surveyed people about how much risk they associate with global warming, which is that green line, gun ownership, the red line, marijuana legalization, the blue line, and vaccination, and found strong correlations with political affiliation. Liberals were very concerned about global warming and gun ownership, and not especially concerned about marijuana legalization. And conservatives were just the opposite. Now, childhood vaccinations were very interesting and an exception, but then a huge majority, over 90% of Americans, think vaccination is a good idea. You should get your kids vaccinated, and they get their kids vaccinated. And so the variance is much less to deal with if you're talking about statistics. Vaccination is not a left-right kind of thing. And there's more data on this, actually. Given that people hold values related to an issue, can you change opinions with more information? Now, the bulk of the studies show that when information contradicts values, ideologies, or identification, it's going to be resisted. Let's look at some research. Nyhan and Riefler conducted several studies, all showing about the same thing. When people with strong opinions are presented with articles that correct misinformation, they don't change their views. They often double down on their original positions. In one example, subjects were given a fake news article to read, quoting President George W. Bush, making a statement that sounded like Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It was followed up by a correction, excuse me, and then subjects were asked whether Saddam had stockpiles of WMDs. People who reported themselves as strongly conservative were even more likely to believe that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction after reading the correction. In another study, they quoted President Bush as claiming that tax cuts improved government revenue. Then they gave them a correction from actually a Republican Bush advisor that, in fact, tax cuts do not improve government revenue. And they found that the subjects who got the correction were more likely to believe the original erroneous statement that tax cuts improve government revenue. This is referred to as the backfire effect. The backfire effect, though, doesn't always happen, and I think that's an important thing to realize. Not everyone doubles down. Mostly it occurs among the people who are the most polarized. In another study by Nyhan's group, they had a sample of parents ranging from strong anti-vaccination to strong pro-vaccination. One group was given an article debunking the idea that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine caused autism. Now, overall, the autism correction story decreased the percentage of parents who thought vaccines caused autism. But it didn't work for a subset of the parents who were really, really, really strong anti-vaxxers. For that group, that caused a backfire effect. So, I mean, they didn't state, but one possibility is that giving them the correction might have reinforced their somewhat conspiracy inclinations. But in any regard, the take-home here is don't assume that providing information always fails. The backfire effect isn't universal. Nobody in this research field is saying, don't try to correct misinformation. Nobody is saying that information doesn't count. But it has to be used correctly, and that needs a whole lot more research. In this study, Kahan, and this study blew my mind when I was reading. Kahan and colleagues tested a sample of adult Americans on numeracy. Are they good at math? Can they read charts? Can they do simple numerical calculations? And in the sample, you had numeracy ranging from high to low. They also collected information on the political leanings of their sample. When asked to evaluate a study of the efficacy of a skin cream for treating rashes, the more numerate did better, which you would expect. They were asked to evaluate a 2-by-2 table where some people got the skin cream, some did not, and some got better and some got worse. They were asked to decide whether using the skin cream is more likely to make the rash get better or worse. For part of the sample, the correct answer was that the rash got worse. For another part of the sample, the rash got better. But they used the same numbers for the cells in both treatments. Okay, all they did is change the column headings. But then they changed it up a bit, and using the same numbers in each cell, asked subjects to decide whether gun control has a positive or negative effect on crime. If you ban concealed weapons, does that increase or decrease crime? As with the hand cream, they jiggered the column headings so part of the sample would get one correct answer, that's C, that crime decreases. Another part of the sample would get the other correct answer, which is D, that crime increases. But the numbers were the same for all treatments. This is really depressing research. Now, overall, most of the sample did pretty poorly on either the skin cream or the gun control question. Skin cream's on the left, gun control question is on the right. Regardless of the correct answer, the cream works or it doesn't work. Handgun control doesn't reduce crime. It wasn't until you got up to the higher levels of numeracy that substantial percentage of people got the answer right. But what you want to look at here is the shape of the distribution. It's pretty similar. Low numeracy equals more wrong answers, high numeracy is more correct answers. This changed a bit when they factored in political identification. As in the previous slide, rash increases or decreases are both correct answers depending on the column headings, and here the results are separated by party affiliation. Blue for liberal Democrats, red for conservative Republicans. As in the general population results, the more numerate did better than the least numerate, and party affiliation didn't really make any difference. The red and blue lines are pretty similar. It's a little different for the gun control answer. Here, Democrats largely believe that crime decreases when guns are restricted, and when that is the correct answer, they're more likely to get it right. And when crime increases is the correct answer, they are more likely to get it wrong, which fits their ideology. Similarly, Republicans are more likely to get correct that crime increases when you restrict guns, and less likely to get it right when the correct answer is crime decreases, which is ideologically less attractive. And this is the really depressing part. Notice that having greater numeracy doesn't make you more likely to get it right if the right answer doesn't fit with your ideology. Now, there are a lot of studies like this showing that values, ideology, or identification tend to trump empirical evidence. In a half hour, I don't have time to give you more examples, but the literature is full of them. My personal experience dealing with creationism and climate change underscores these conclusions, which is really great when the research supports your idiosyncratic experience. Identification as a conservative Christian and the ideology of biblical literalism are major barriers to the acceptance of evolution for conservative Christians. Similarly, the values of personal responsibility, small government, a strong military, the importance of capitalism, and recently at least, identification as a Republican are prime inhibitors of the acceptance of anthropogenic global climate change for political conservatives. So what to do about it? I think coping with knowledge resistance requires distinguishing between opinion and fact. Probably everybody in this room would agree with Senator Moynihan, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. In a democracy, people will have different opinions, and debates about opinions are healthy. There are very important issues that Americans have different opinions about: how to handle health care, what to do about ISIS, the problem of criminal justice, what to do about gun violence or climate change, and so forth. Where facts and empirical information come in is in informing these opinions. But those of us from the fact-based world have to realize that opinions include so much more than facts and empirical evidence. We risk committing Huxley's naturalistic fallacy if we don't realize that the way things are is not necessarily the way things should be. And opinions are quite often about the shoulds. So let us by all means vigorously debate our opinions. Opinions hopefully informed by empirical and factual information, but opinions are determined by more than just the facts. They're determined also by our values and our ideologies. But opinion should not be confused with whether the earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the earth, with whether living things have common ancestors, with whether CO2 is a warming gas. Those are not opinions, and scientists have already debated them. To creationists, evolution is an opinion, not scientifically real. To climate change deniers, a warming planet is an opinion, not scientifically real. Excuse me. Part of our job is to get people to realize the difference between science and opinions that may be informed by science to a greater or lesser degree. Debate opinions. It's good, clean fun to argue about whether we should have a carbon tax or cap and trade. But we shouldn't be debating whether we are experiencing anthropogenic global warming. This may not be as difficult as it seems, because Americans already have an interest in and high degree of acceptance and confidence in science. But ultimately, our task is not primarily about the science. The problem isn't primarily science deficit. The science isn't going to be listened to if people have their fingers jammed in their ears. What keeps the fingers jammed in the ears is the belief that something very important is going to be lost if the other guy is right. To anti-evolutionists, if evolution is true, the consequences are stupendous and horrendous. They believe they have to give up their belief in God and the truth of the Bible, which means the loss of salvation, loss of a center for morality and behavior, the loss of friends, social support, their tribal affiliation. For climate change contrarians, they believe that climate change alarmists will weaken the economy, increase central government, endanger national security, and require compromises in individual liberty. If those concerns aren't assuaged, all the science in the world won't be convincing. The values, ideology, and identification variables are essential to consider in addition to the science. Communications research has suggested that changing minds requires effective messages, and there's a lot of research on what these messages would be, of course, depending on subject. Effective messages for evolution will be different from those for climate, will be different from those for tax policy, and so forth and so on. I did a radio show a couple of years ago in Canada where there was, in the community, there was this tiny little flare-up of anti-vax enthusiasm. And I remember just being so delighted because the talk show host, the host of the radio interview program, was saying how, in her opinion, one of the really important reasons for getting your children vaccinated was herd immunity, to protect the community. I was thinking, God, I love Canada. Can you imagine saying that in the United States and getting a whole bunch of people saying, yes, we should all go and get our kids immunized so that we will have social solidarity and group? No. I just don't think that would be an effect. I think it's a really important message. I don't think it'd be very effective with Americans. There's been a lot of research about crafting messages. Ed Maybach at the George Mason Center for Climate Change Communication stresses simplicity when communicating the importance of climate change. Their research show that people who have these 5 beliefs, it's happening, it's real, it's us, it's bad, it's solvable, these are the people who are more likely to support action regarding climate change. Translating these beliefs into messages has generated another large literature. For example, point 4, that climate change is bad for people rather than other organisms, is more effective. We care more about people than we do about polar bears. So stressing the health problems associated with climate change is one such effective message. Importantly, the message has to come from a trusted messenger. Now, of course, the most trusted messengers are the ones who are most like you. The idea is that someone like yourself can speak the same language, has the same values and concerns and identifications. A friend told me he got into a discussion about GMOs with an acquaintance and wasn't making any headway at all. At one point, the other guy said something like, oh, you libertarians are all alike. And he said, libertarian? What? I'm not libertarian, I'm a socialist. Totally changed the whole conversation. The other guy started to listen. And my friend described this at, because I was like him, maybe I was saying something that ought to be listened to. Evangelical Christians who accept evolution, like Dennis Lamoureux and Glenn Morton, and pretty much anybody from BioLogos, are very important messengers to the evangelical community about evolution. Katharine Hayhoe is a climate scientist who is also an evangelical Christian. As a fellow evangelical, she is in a unique position to be a trusted messenger to evangelicals who reject climate change. The trusted messenger has to have the right message to be effective. Catherine's message to her fellow evangelicals stresses a theology called creation care, stewardship theology, and also the values expressed in social gospel theology, which is important to many evangelicals. By the way, don't confuse the anti-evolution movement with the anti-climate science movement. They're by and large different groups. The major motivating factor for anti-evolution is religious ideology, conservative Christianity. The major motivating ideology behind climate change rejection is political and or economic conservatism. There's a little overlap of evangelical Christians who are anti-climate change, but that's because they are also politically conservative. There's a whole lot of green Christians who are very, very much concerned about climate change. There's a certain amount of overlap with political conservatives and the anti-evolution movement, but that's because they are religious conservatives as well as political conservatives. This is much easier if I had a Venn diagram to show you these overlapping things here. But you know, one reason why I read my talks is so otherwise I go off my tether and I start talking about all these other things, and then I go way over my time. Oh, crap, here I go again. So I'm gonna go back to the notes. Okay, stay with me. Okay. Anyway, Catherine's great. These individuals can be trusted messengers on climate change to different audiences. Bob Inglis is a former Republican congressman. Michael Shermer is a libertarian, another group that has been known to reject climate change. And Richard Cizik is the former head of the National Association of Evangelicals. Interestingly enough, all three of them have had conversions from being climate change contrarians to recognizing the reality of anthropogenic climate change. Finally, communication specialists tell us that messages need to be repeated often before they are absorbed. Finally, communication specialists tell us that messages need to be repeated often before they are absorbed. Another ad lib, and I'm going over time. I always used to tell my colleagues at NCSE that no one ever changed somebody's mind in one pass. The best you can hope for is to crack that door a little bit, and then maybe the next person to come along with that same message may be able to crack the door a little bit better. Don't expect to change somebody's mind in one barrage of information, shall we say. And about this repetition thing, there is research to show that an idea, well, such as the lack of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that's repeated very often in the news eventually gets accepted, or at least more people will accept it. This, of course, can be good or bad. NPR released a poll a few days ago reporting that 55% of American whites believe that whites are discriminated against. The data do not support that minorities are getting all the jobs. Okay. Perhaps this qualifies as a message repeated often, which becomes accepted. So what does research tell us about knowledge resistance? Well, we know there are some ideas that can change our minds about, and others that we are resistant to change our minds about. It's partly the ideas themselves. You can change your mind about how photosynthesis works, or that we use 10% of our brain, because those ideas don't challenge our ideologies, values, or identification with social groups. We know that people are reluctant to change their minds for many reasons, and it's not stupidity, ignorance, or rejection of science. It's not that people ignore the science. Americans like science, and there is evidence that information can change minds. It's not all the backfire effect. It's just that ideology, values, and how people identify with others comes first before the science can be listened to. Finally, we need to consider communication strategies that have been shown to work to help us do a better job. Here is my low-tech suggestion. People need to talk to one another. We need to build up relationships of trust, which requires mutual respect. Trusted messengers are listened to. The most trusted are people from the same tribe, clearly, but even if you're from a different tribe, you can build a trustful relationship with someone who disagrees with you, who has different opinions. As a humanist, I nonetheless have built up a level of trust among evangelical Christians over the years by treating them respectfully and listening to their concerns. You learn a lot that way. Mutual respect occurs when people get to know one another as individuals rather than as symbols. If you can establish trustful relationship, then there's a chance that you can get the fingers out of the ears and that you can move forward. The science then has a chance to be listened to. And I'll bet you everybody in this room has confidence that science can make a difference, information can make a difference. What we know the evidence supports is very important. Once values, ideology, and identification are not the most important issues. Thank you very much.